So we spent the morning talking about change and how difficult change is. And we just want to acknowledge one more time that we think we talk to facility managers, facility directors across so many hospitals on such a regular basis. We want you to know that we understand. This is not an easy time for any of you right now. We're piling on everything else, and we thought we'd just pile on the misery and just remind you of all the things that ruin every single day of your lives. So, and there's nothing here, I don't have to read these things, but this is the stuff you're all trying to deal with. And at the same time, we're saying there's real urgency about addressing climate change and climate action and being ready for decarbonization, like on top of everything else that you're doing. So this afternoon session is all about recognizing the challenges and yes, the struggles, but also looking at emerging solutions that there's all kinds of organizations in the room that are looking to help. And we at Greening Healthcare are putting a lot of thought into how do we do things differently? Like how do we do things smartly? How do we recognize the fact that you already have too much on your plate and we're asking you to do more? How do we make that even possible? And we talk about, as we run through this, it's emerging solutions. We're going to do some Imagineering right now. We're going to think about what could be, what might be. And the reality of whether it happens or not depends on these people, on you folks in this room looking at that and saying, that sounds like an idea. I could build on that. I could develop that. And for the hospitals, you need to look at the conversation we're going to have this afternoon, and we hope you'll be part of that conversation. So we're not going to have Q&A in this panel discussion, but the whole of the rest of the day then is Q&A around insights, ideas, what you've heard, what you're thinking of doing, where you could use help, and so on. So this afternoon, but we're talking about emerging solutions, possibilities, with the certainty that we have to do things differently if we want different outcomes. So if everybody takes one thing away today, it will be the idea, tomorrow I need to be doing things differently, because right now, what we're doing as a hospital sector with respect to greenhouse gas emissions reductions is not working. And we're having similar conversations in California, in New York. Every jurisdiction we look in has the same struggles and the same challenges. So we're not alone, but we need to figure this out. Again, the climate's completely run out of patience with us. It doesn't care. If it's taking us time, it's not willing to wait. It's going to keep doing worse and worse and worse things to us until we figure it out. So we know all of that. So we want to talk about this alternative service delivery models and applied into 3 areas. So service agreements that are delivered to from service providers to your hospitals. Can we buy smarter? Can we set a different expectation around that relationship with service contractors? We want to talk about what does decarbonization look like, deep retrofits, when we have big capital projects that hospitals were never intended to be able to kind of design and figure those out on their own. Where do we get that kind of help? What might those new contracting arrangements look like? What could the elements be? And we want to take another look at the whole area of new hospital development and look at that failure rate we talked about this morning. There's a better than 50% failure rate of new hospitals achieving either their energy targets or high performance standards. And the idea, we've got to get the new hospitals right. If we can't even do that, it's going to be really hard to figure out the rest of it. So that's where we're going to begin. We have an exceptional panel here that we'll introduce in just a moment, but we're going to debate these things, but it's Imagineering. We're not asking anybody to commit to anything. We just want to explore principles of outcome-based agreements and which ones might apply where, what can happen. So we'll work our way through that. At 2:15, we'll have a coffee and networking break, which is the last get together for reflection and thinking before the reception. Again, I do hope that most of you will be able to stay on for the reception. When all of this is fresh in my mind and your minds, this is the best time to have those kind of transformational conversations about, you know, just thinking about what about this? And suddenly sparks happen, and again, we get triple word scores. So keep coming back to those. The words to action, this is the closing of the conference. We're going to share with you available resources. We have the Government of Canada here, we have Enbridge Gas, we have the IESO, and we're going to talk about what resources do they have. We want to talk about planning for success. So the Ontario hospitals in this room, you all have to produce energy conservation demand management plans next year. And some of you will have seen it before, but we just want to, what are the principles, whether you do the plans yourself, whether you bring somebody in to do them for you, what are the principles you should take away from here to make sure that this time they work? Because these plans, as we said this morning, they take us up to 2029. We don't get another kick at the 2030 targets. We've got to come up with plans in 2024 that will take us to 2029 that are implementable, actionable, accountable. We actually know that we have the resources to get them done, and we're committed to them. And as all of us, like we all have to kind of contribute there. Again, the government can't do this. It requires that we produce plans. We have to produce plans that work. We want to talk about what that planning looks like. We want to talk a bit about working together, and that's a shameless plug for greening healthcare. It's a collaborative model. There are others there. We're very respectful. You know, the hospitals in Hamilton, love what they're doing together. They're all kind of getting together, and they have a little committee, and they share data, and we provide data to them. But it's time for collaboration. We don't have enough time between now and 2030 for us all to invent that wheel independently. We just got to share, and we talked about that this morning, but it's an absolute necessity. So again, a thought you might take away today is, who am I going to share with? Who am I going to collaborate with? Who am I going to learn from? And I heard those models coming over lunch. It was about time we talked about sustainability plans, because we're all making them, and we're all making them independently. Let's do them together. So those of you who study these things will have noticed our previous agenda for this event had case studies as the last event of the year. And we had a long conversation about, we could present 2 case studies, 3 case studies, and they might relate to 1 or 2 of you. And somebody came up with a smart idea. We got a room full of case studies here. Every one of you is a case study. And so we want to use that time to hear from as many of you as we can about what are the issues that you're facing. From everything you've heard today, what resonates with you? What is the thing where you could use help? And again, this will not be posted as a recording. You're free to say exactly what you think, what you feel, where you think the opportunities are, where you think the pressure points are. And we will turn that into a bit of a white paper that we can share with everybody, but it'll be anonymous. Nobody will be tagged with the comments that are made. And that really is our closing for the day. So think about this you've got a room full of consultants here. Even if you're hospitals, you're a consultant today. You've got a room full of advice, you've got a room full of experience, you've got a room full of ideas. Stand up and say what's on your mind. It's kind of like a therapy session. I'm Dave. But in a way, tomorrow you're back at it. Tomorrow you're back at work. Your in tray is full. Pipe burst. All that's happening. That's reality. So from today, what can you carry forward from today in terms of alliances, friends, ideas, insights that will allow you to actually get on with this once the reality of work sets back in? So that's our plan for the afternoon. And again, I'm looking forward to the reception. I always look forward to a glass of wine after these things, but mostly it's the conversations among all of us. So that's our plan for the afternoon, if that works for everybody here. So the emerging solutions we want to talk about are exactly this idea. So you're all buying service contracts now. Building automation, boilers, chillers, whatever they may be. Testing. You've all got building condition assessment, consultants coming through your facilities, figuring out what's end of life and what to replace it with. All of that's happening right now. How can you buy those services better so they become a partner? And some of the stuff we talked about this morning is multi-year relationship. How do you procure multi-year relationships that deliver outcomes? And as we were saying with John Marshman over lunch, you can take a piece of this responsibility and make somebody else responsible for it. You get peace of mind that they're giving you what you need, they're moving you down that path. We want to present, again, available resources. We're going to share with you all the stuff that's on the Greening Healthcare website. It's free, it's open to you. Whether you're a member or not, you can go access it. Industry folks, go look at it, it's all up there. We want to talk about ECDM plans, and again, we want to talk about working together at the end, which leads into the action planning stage. So let's get on with our panel. So alternative service delivery models, and this is for our panel's consideration. There are principles behind what we think works, and I'm guessing we'll add 50% to these principles by the time this conversation is over, because I'm going to be taking copious notes. But the idea, we haven't got time to fix every hospital one idea at a time. So we're going to hear about Southlake and how one idea for improving the boiler plant evolved into a comprehensive approach to let's make the boiler plant as efficient as it can be. Let's go find everything that's going to make it work. So it needs to be comprehensive, integrated, fixing the supply side from the plant with the demand side from the systems. We like the idea of pay for performance, the accountability. We think contractors who do a better job and achieve better results should be paid more. And that should kind of make sense. That's the opportunity. Contractors that deliver projects that don't deliver results should be paid less. So the idea of gain share, pain share that's taken hold during the idea of new hospitals, let's look at how we can make that apply in each of these. So everything we look at, we want to look at from the standpoint of pay for performance. Project financing, is that a big deal, or is the hospital generally going to be able to finance things? We can talk about project financing, who could offer it, what the terms might look like. We want to talk with Janet in particular about ease of procurement. You know, can you actually buy it? It might be a really good idea, but if it doesn't fit the mold, either we have to fix the approach to the solution, or we have to fix the mold. How much confidence do you and your executive need to have that this is actually going to work? There's a lot of ideas. I almost say good ideas. A lot of ideas out there, some of which have great merit and others don't. How do you pick and choose? You're busy. You haven't got time to look through those things. So what does the supply side, what do the contractors have to provide to give you confidence that, yeah, this is a good bet? And where we find something that we're absolutely certain Greening Healthcare works, we're happy to join, if you like, the team, typically with the utility company, with the contractor and the hospital, to lend whatever credibility we have to say this is a smart thing to do. But how do you have the confidence that this is the right project? We talked a lot over lunch about energy targets. We don't think energy targets are that complicated. Like every building type, K-12 schools, office buildings, hospitals, as long as you have the right type of hospital and you make a few adjustments, there's only so much energy your hospitals need. And quite honestly, right now, if everybody adopted the Greening Healthcare top quartile target, the one we looked at this morning that would generate 30% emissions reduction, if you made that your target, it's not the best that anybody can do, but you give a contractor the opportunity to win on the gain share and hold them accountable. Because if we get everybody to that top quartile, we kind of solve the problem. Now we're going in the right direction. We bent the curve and we've got a model we can share with the rest of the world. Energy targets for me are everything. Your hospital has an energy target. If you don't have it, we can tell you what it is. If you have people who can come and say, I'll get you there, and I'll provide that assurance to you, then we're winning. Metering is a big deal. We've got our friends from QMC here today. You know, metering solutions, new hospitals, especially more recent ones, have the benefit that we have metering data. We can actually see at a system level, a subsystem level, where the energy is going. We can identify opportunities through that metering. But reporting is there as well. How do we expect operators to do a better job of running the facility if we aren't giving them regular reporting on how they're doing? And it really is quite simple. It's, you know, last month we saved energy. You know, it's easy to weather normalize. We saved 18% of our gas and 10% of our electricity. Everybody gets excited about that. What does that reporting look like? So that fits into the idea of the delivery model. If my friend Paul here is doing a boiler service contract, made improvements, how do we measure the savings to reassure the hospital that this was a good investment and it worked? And importantly, that the contractor learns from it, because every now and again it won't work. And that's how we get smarter, right? We get the feedback. We say, man, we didn't get it right this time. What went wrong? And you fix it, and we all get smarter, and the next one we do better, and so on. But metering and reporting is a big deal. Commissioning, we would argue, we see as the biggest weakness with new hospitals. That commissioning the facility to run the way it was modeled, the way it was intended, and we see a massively expanded scope of work for a commissioning agent to prove that the system is working as intended, and if it's not, to identify where the breakdowns are, where the failures, where the things should work. So new approaches to commissioning. We're hoping that at least some of you will speak to that. And the reality of internal resources. We talked about challenges and struggles. So these different kinds of delivery models, how many of these are that somebody will take care of this and you can trust them and work with them over multiple years, and how many are going to eat you alive with managing? Like, I don't want to hear any more about these kind of contracts and the legal disputes. You know, how much money are we willing to spend on lawyers instead of making the world a better place? You know, so the whole internal resources, robust contracts that won't be disputable. And last but not least in our kind of 10-point list is staff training. Like, how do we want to educate, train, motivate, even reward? Like, how do we get our own staff engaged in all this stuff to work? So I've asked our panel to kind of reflect upon each of these principles, and we'll come back to them when we get into the discussion about how could this work in different scenarios. The promising areas that we're excited about at the moment, that we're working on with many of you, is the idea of service agreements, as opposed to showing up to make sure that the boiler's safe and it's working properly and that the building automation system is functioning, as opposed to it's delivering high performance. Really interested, what could those emerging models look like? Again, we got our friends here from Blackstone, from Ecosystem. There are others in this room who are looking at this whole idea. Deep retrofits, that's what decarbonization is going to look like. I used to have all these steam boilers. Now I got a heat recovery chiller. What does that look like? How do you actually get from here to there with the conceptual design, with the implementation, and then proving you've got that high performance outcome at the end? And again, as mentioned at the beginning, we then want to talk about the whole P3, the DB, DBF, DBFM models and process here, and get thoughts from other jurisdictions, Manitoba, New York, British Columbia, about if this is the way we're going to be delivering new hospitals on a go-forward basis. How do we identify the gaps in current practice that lead to the very high failure rate of high performance among new hospitals in Ontario and across North America? How do we get to that? So these are the three areas that we want to focus upon today. We have three projects for consideration. One is Southlake Regional Hospital with John and with Paul, that we'll talk about the evolution of that project and where it could lead to. So we've reached a certain point with that work now. The next stage of that, what could it be? What could it look like? What would make sense to both Thermogenics and to the hospital? And we have our friends from Enbridge Gas here as well, who are providing incentives to make that work. What does that new association, what does that new alliance look like? We can ask Janet to share with us the latest developments with respect to the energy performance contracting model for decarbonizing and renewing the physical plant at Headwaters Healthcare, what that looks like, and we'll dig into that a bit with Janet. And we've got Cliff, Harvey, and Colin from the industry side and the hospital side to talk about the strengths and areas for improvement of the current new hospital delivery model. So those are the three that we want to tackle today. We believe everybody in this room is involved in at least one of these three, and we hope you'll take copious notes and carry those forward through the break to this final session of Q&A. So let's see how that plays out. For each of these three projects, we want to talk about the story so far. How did we get to where we are? I'm going to give you a bit my understanding of the anecdotes and then hear from everybody else. And the three things that have to be right for this to make sense to you. The first is it's got to be comprehensive. We've got to get it all right. We can't be doing bits and pieces here and then have another project next year, we just don't have time for all of that. So the scope of work, that it's the right design, it's the right approach, and particularly that the savings are achieved, that you get high performance. Secondly, everything around funding, procurement, performance-based contracts, the headaches and the opportunities with those, and the working relationship between external contractors and hospitals. And we want to talk about this issue of demands on internal resources. So from our hospitals here, how much time does this take and where do you find the time to do that? How simple can we make these models as they go forward? So that's the plan. That's what we plan to do over the next, what were we now? Yeah, just a bit less than an hour. And if I may, again, introduce, I think most of these folk are familiar with most of the people in the room, but Cliff, who every time he almost gets a new hospital right, he moves on. But leaving a trail of real progress. You know, it's always been a pleasure working with Cliff, a kind of forward thinker. So now at Grand River and St. Mary's, bringing together two hospitals to come up with a coordinated development effort. Again, John has been a speaker for us on so many occasions with a background with new hospitals like Peel Memorial and older hospitals, and one of the first of the P3 projects. Just such a wealth of experience. And again, a big thinker. We're honored to have folks to do this. Colin with EllisDon Facility Services, working with these projects and bringing the industry perspective of how can we make this work better. I've loved the whole conversation today about people working together to find better solutions. Like, we're all in this together. There's no combatants here except humanity and the environment. And right now we're the attackers on the environment and the environment's fighting back. So we're all in this together. Everyone has a place to play. Janet, with her strong procurement and facilities background, developing something that we think is very promising and very innovative at Headwaters, and Paul, who will be talking with John Marshman on the Southlake experience, one of the most innovative folks that we've encountered with respect to thinking, what does the future need to look like, and how can Thermogenics, as a major player in this space, how can they help us get there? So that's our panel. Thanks for their presence here. Let me give you, and we're going to start with a bit of an overview, and then of each of the three projects, then we're going to dive down. The background to Southlake was Thermogenics suggesting to the hospital that, you know, those steam boilers, linkageless controls would make them more efficient. And the hospital could check with Enbridge Gas and say, that makes sense to us. Sure, that's a good idea. And they implemented the project at the beginning, I think, of 2022. And if you don't recognize it, this is greening healthcare. This is from the online energy savings tracking system that all greening healthcare members use. It does the weather normalization. And again, if you're not familiar, the red dots are the baseline adjusted for weather differences. The blue dots are the actual gas consumption. And you can see about the time this was done, early 2022, you see the blue dots are below the red dots. That's a good thing. Those are real savings. So that's gas savings. As we looked at this after the fact with John and with his team, we were surprised that the gas savings were less during the summer. You see the summer months in the middle there. The blue is still below the red, but not as far. Linkageless controls should do more under lighter operating conditions. So that didn't quite make sense. Started a conversation where, which led to our summer workshop. So we presented this case study in our summer workshop. You'll find the recording of that on our website. Talking about, first, are the linkageless controls working as intended? Because the numbers suggest maybe not, and that the savings could be much bigger. And then secondarily, what else could be done in the boiler plant? If you ask Paul's team who are here to walk through that boiler plant, what else was there. And they discovered all kinds of things about bypasses around economizers and steam pressures too high. And it was very much a collaborative. Enbridge Gas was part of the conversation. John is there, and Brent is there, and Paul and Dean are there. And they're looking around, and there's so many things that could be done. So from one measure, it turned into a list of 6. You check the boxes, these things could be done. Spend a bit more, save a lot more, create more incentives, reduce gas. So that's the story so far. Maybe, Paul, from your perspective first, it doesn't matter which order we go in and so on. Give us your take on the story so far for this project from industry standpoint.
Is that working? It was a really fascinating project for us because we've been partners with Southlake for so long. When we suggested the upgrade, it's something to me, it felt like this is a conversation that's been happening for 20, 30 years. You know, you look at a boiler, you look at the load profile of the plant, it's pretty clear to see that newer technology might help the situation. But the challenge for a lot of providers like us is we know what we know from past experiences, but how do you know specifically by that account what the performance is going to be like? So, you know, we commit together to go down this path, we put the linkage list in, and greening takes a snapshot. And then the question comes out, hey, what's going on here? And we say, good question. That hasn't happened in the past. Or perhaps we saw that at here, and this was the following reason. And that led to the next layer of measures. And I think for us, and we've been doing these for a long time and they evolve, but now we have the visual, thanks to greening and the constant input from the various hospitals. We're very nimble now at looking at the next layer of the onion. So we peeled the first one off, we saw an issue, we determined what we thought that next layer issue was, which we'll talk about in a minute, I suppose. But then identified several other opportunities that I don't think we would have seen if we hadn't seen this snapshot and the change in performance.
Yeah, and sorry, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So maybe stepping back a little bit, I had come from, when I first came to Southlake, I'd come from an environment where the bulk of my infrastructure was under P3 contracts, and I had sort of, you know, top level energy targets as really the key driver to some of the outcomes that we were looking at. And that's a conversation maybe we'll explore a little bit later in terms of the actual efficacy of that. So when I got to Southlake, you know, I didn't have any of those tools. There wasn't really a clear framework to be able to implement projects. And you know, as we were looking towards a long-term redevelopment, recognizing the facility we were operating needed to ultimately be replaced. We still sitting in the bottom quartile, I believe, in greening healthcare. We really needed to take a look at, you know, what can we do as we're working through all of these sort of big bucket measures. What can we really do on the ground? And you know, I think it's interesting because, you know, that like the notion of a contract is obviously not about collaboration. It's about a polarity. You're essentially getting two people to move in an opposite direction towards a middle that you've established in the contract. So I think the way that we wanted to look at this was, okay, I can set a target and go out and get an ESCO to sort of, you know, run an optimization of my boiler plant, and then I'll nail to that target. But in the end of the day, well, that is an outcome. Is it really the outcome that I'm looking for? The outcome I'm looking for is a fully optimized boiler plant. And so I'll say right off, I don't have an outcome-based service contract right now with Thermogenics. But that the model we pursued was really trying to identify what's the real outcome that we're trying to achieve, and how can we kind of organize the players around that outcome. And so, you know, I think obviously the first step was doing the linkageless controllers, but then engaging Thermogenics as the subject matter expert to drive them to ultimately look at, you tell me, you know this equipment, how can we actually run this better? So I don't know if you wanted to talk about any of the.
No, let's pause that one there, and then we'll drive on. The original decision it was before your time, John, I think, but the linkageless controls, that was a 6-figure decision, right? That was a proposition that came from your contractor saying, look, we can do this.
Yep.
It'll save a lot of gas. Where do you think input from Enbridge Gas saying this seems to make sense? How did that business decision get made? Because Southlake is not flush with cash, right? How did that get approved?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think they, at the time, and again, this was a decision that was made in advance of me being there, but at the time, there was a business case that made sense for the hospital at the time. So based on this.
Perfect. So we're going to come back to this so this is how we got to so far, and then we want to explore like what could this become, where Greening Healthcare's goal is to have a replicable model that can be applied to 5,000 hospital boiler rooms across North America by 2030. Sounds impossible, but maybe not if, again, as we talked about this morning, we standardize it. John, you look like you've got another.
No.
Okay, good.
Listening intently.
Let's talk about, Janet, turn to you and Headwaters. So you've got the history that you took over the facilities group at Headwaters, aging physical plant. Some of the pictures on the right-hand side gather that, and a very innovative approach to contracting to let's get it right with a project, as opposed to piecemeal. Give us a bit of the backstory to this, if you could, as to how this came about and what was the inspiration.
Yeah, I think for us, you're right. We were a very, very bad aging hospital. There was very bad infrastructure. It had not been kept up. It was 25 years old. So we were at the point in time where we had to make a decision on how we were going to move forward. What we did realize was we are not in the business of this type of work. We're in the business of looking after patients. We're in the business of running a hospital, outcomes for patients. So how do we, as an organization, then go into a procurement where we have to upgrade our whole boiler plant and look at our BAS? So how do we do that when it's not our line of business? So we looked at, in my previous world, I worked at Southlake on one of the big innovative procurement outcomes projects for a cardiac program that was hugely successful. And one of the ideas was, well, how do we roll that type of a procurement into other modalities within healthcare in the public sector? So we sat down with our team and said, we know what our targets are going to be because we have best practices out there. We also have a strategic plan within our organization. We have a huge resource of clinical folks within our organization that know where we want to be in 25 years, what our population is going to be like. So we took that opportunity to roll it into an outcomes-based procurement based on, we're not going to tell you what we want our model to look like. We're going to give you targets. We're going to ask you questions about what type of outcomes you can provide us with based on our strategic plan and our direction that we're going in the next 25 years, what that's going to look like. And from that, build a partnership and have conversations about where we need to be, what we need to be doing, because we're not the experts. That's not what we do for a living. We look after patients. We look at and we do patient care. So we wanted to go through this outcomes-based procurement and find a partner who has that expertise in providing solutions for us in that realm. And by having our competitive dialogue sessions with the companies, and they were very, very successful. The comments that we did hear from those folks that we had those conversations with is that it was very, very intuitive and a better way of actually being able to sit in front of the folks, have those conversations. We had the OR manager there. We had the IPAC professional there to actually understand what our needs were. I think it was hugely successful. We're at the stage now where we have a first-rank supplier that we're in the starting of a feasibility study to see how far we've come and how close we are with our targets. And we're really positive for the future.
Great initiative. So if I understand this, you're looking for kind of that elusive mix of a partnership as opposed to a pure transactional relationship, specific outcomes, but leaving room for the contractor to bring innovation,
Absolutely.
which
And
sounds perfect.
yeah, and it's the risk sharing, right? Like that's at the end of the day, companies need to, as you said in the past, companies need to make a living. We're not stopping you from doing that, but we do have to have the ability to share the risks for anything that's put into the organization. The hospital shouldn't bear the full responsibility of that once these boilers are put into the building. The risk sharing has to happen, and it has to happen long term over a very long period of time where things change, the building gets older, COVID happens again or whatever. We have to be able to ebb and flow in that contract and be able to share it and share the risks for it.
Yeah, so the idea of relationships, multi-year relationships, resilience, adaptability, all those things that we talked about this morning, they come to bear here as well. Let's walk along to this, Cliff. So we've and we'll get Colin get the perspectives of what went wrong. So again, this is the chart on the left-hand side is somewhat iconic. The coded hospitals are all built within or open within the last less than 20 years. Some at the top are amazing, and there's a very high failure rate in terms of achieving high performance. And I can't think of a kinder way to express that. And there's reasons for that. It's not that we don't know how to build highly efficient hospitals and get it right the first time. It's just more than half the time we're not doing so. We just added the cover there for reference for everybody in this business of new hospital design on the right-hand side, the high performance metrics guide. It's the work that we did at the beginning of 2023 to publish how the hospitals at the top there, how much do they use for lighting, for fans, for pumps, for chillers, for reheat, for all of the component energy use, with the intent that now finally you can calibrate energy models to empirical data from high performance facilities. So this has been ongoing work for 5 years now, but still we get again, hate to say it, but from an energy and emission standpoint, the failures. Cliff, first thought on what are the big things that go wrong? And what are the big things that go right? So what have you seen so far? And then Colin, really looking forward to the industry side of that equation. And then all of these things, we're going to dig deeper as we kind of continue this conversation.
So I think the simple answer is where it goes wrong is they don't have a plan. And looking at that, and I know a lot of those are aged facilities that were under development. It's still 20 years ago, but this wasn't an issue 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I joined the Ministry of Health, and there was a small section in the capital planning manual that said that you needed to have an energy plan by stage 3. The only problem with that is that when it came into the Ministry of Health, there was no mechanical engineers to actually look at it, and there was no way to measure it, and there were no targets set. And so we saw the emergence probably over the first decade of the 2000s, the emergence of LEED and sustainability, and it started to creep itself up there. But I would argue that each hospital didn't have a plan, didn't have a target, didn't know where they were trying to get to. I think what we're starting to see, and Humber's a good example of that, and lessons learned to South Niagara, was to make it part of the overall goal, a performance goal, a metric in the project, so that we put it into our plan. And we use targets, and we try to be better. I think everybody in this room always wants to be better, either partly because we're competitive, but also because we recognize that we're not going to get there with the same things that we do day to day today. And so putting a plan together was absolutely huge. And I'll respond to using the same theme Kyle asked about leadership goals.
Absolutely 100% from an operational point of view and your day-to-day operations of facilities, if you can move them up into the performance plan of the senior executives, of which when I was at North York General with the support of Andrew, who probably actually spearheaded most of that work, made it a requirement that the senior leadership had to deliver on targets, both for renewing the facility, better performance, or different things. That made it part of the board work too. And so a lesson learned from that, which helped us. And I will say, having a CFO who sees the value of a business plan that says you get a payback in X years. I believe that's something, I forget, it was 5-7 years was sort of his limitation on it. But what he said was, thank you very much, I'll take that money. We had a plan to say, when we get that money back, we're going to invest it into this, and then we'll get even more back. And it's something that facilities don't get to do because you can save me money, that's great. Your point is that we deliver clinical care, we don't run facilities. Well, I kind of disagree, because we do run facilities, we just don't get recognized for it, and we don't get the success. If the board does get that, they'll continue to renew that, and you have to have a long-term plan for it. Take that one more step to a new facility. You want to have the same performance plan in place around achieving targets, achieving goals. And so the success is that, like with the new South Niagara project, we have a performance plan in place, a design management plan, if you want to put it that. We want to achieve certain goals, and sustainability was one of them. The only way we could do that was actually put a plan together and have those targets put in place. We'll measure that, and then maybe that's where Colin would make sense, in the sense that those also then turn themselves into both a contractual relationship, and I use the word relationship strongly, not a transactional, but a relationship to actually continue to deliver and get better with the overall energy.
Colin, your sense of what went right, what went wrong?
I was going to talk to South Niagara and what went right, so far, and then I'll go to what went wrong. So South Niagara is an interesting project. It's got a very aggressive targets. I think the difference that I see and I've been involved in 9 facilities that are currently in operation. South Niagara, we're getting involved as a service provider right at the beginning and everybody's talking about energy. So at every step, at every design meeting, we talk about energy. We were talking to a BAS contractor, we're talking about energy. And I think in the early days of P3 or not too long ago, energy was something you did a model, you put the target in place, and then the building got constructed, and off we go, and then you do your commissioning, and it doesn't get talked about until post-substantial. And I think the difference in South Niagara is we're partnering with both the healthcare provider as well as our construction colleagues, the engineering teams, the mechanical electrical teams, and everybody understands what those targets are. So everybody's driving to the same end. And I don't think we saw that in the last 10 years.
So the relationship has matured.
The relationship has matured. And I think I was speaking at the C2P3 conference a month ago or so, bringing the partnership back into P3. It's a partnership between not only the healthcare provider and the project company, but the healthcare provider, the project company, the engineers, the mechanical and electrical, the construction company, and service provider.
Ian, can I jump in just to highlight one point there? Because I think one of the first things Colin said was that bringing the operations team to the onset of the conversation, I think we often get confused that we are building icons when we go through the design processes, and actually we're just facilitating care, right? We're building vessels for care, and as such, and I think in previously and somewhat driven by the structure of the DBFM AFP model, the operator came to the table late. Those conversations were led by the design team, by ambitious engineers looking for ASHRAE awards. Sorry, Kurt. But I think this evolution is really I think from the owner's perspective, making sure that in that contract operations team are leading those conversations, not the design team. That you're hearing it from the mouth of the person who's going to actually throw the switches and operate the system. Sorry,
Cliff, you want that?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things we were very conscious of was to make sure that the operators, the FM, was a big component of the open period, that they were engaged. We made note when they weren't, because we were concerned, and that they had their own dialogue going on as well. The lessons learned is that, and we've learned that from other problems, that they would show up at the last minute, right? And so that engagement is a full team engagement. It's just not talking about building a hospital. We're not just getting a building, we're getting a hospital, and that's absolutely key. That's a key message.
Great. Let's dig deeper. And reminding everybody in the audience, I'm sure this is provocative for a number of you, but save your thoughts and your comments and your questions for the final session, because I want to make sure we've got our gun fully loaded for that last session, because as soon as 2 or 3 of you have provided your thoughts and ideas, then everybody else is going to join in. And for us, that's the culmination of the day, right? It's what did we learn? Did we make headway today? What is that going to look like? But let's dig a bit deeper, and I'm going to keep going in the same order. We'll go from Southlake to Headwaters to new hospital delivery models, because otherwise I get confused, and then we'll run our way through. But if these are the requirements for success, comprehensive, integrated solutions, pay for performance, project financing, can we explore with Southlake and John, what would your perfect model be for Thermogenics looking after your boiler plant, so you don't have to think about it? Everything's under control, nothing bad's going to happen. And how does that relate into some of these things? What are the features of an outcome-based service model that you'd like to see built in there? And then we'll ask Paul if he can do that.
Note to self, next time I sign up to speak, make sure Ian sends questions in advance. I think, oftentimes we talk about a partnership. And so, in a real outcome-based model, you like partnership is obviously going to be key. I've struggled at, and Ian and I were debating earlier at lunch just with the notion of a target as your fundamental contractual deliverable, because ultimately it doesn't allow for, you can take a target and you can layer in pain share and gain share, but you're not actually really building true collaboration. You're incentivizing based on you're trying to force collaboration through other metrics. So, I think I think my ideal contract is a contract that enables the service provider to be able to deliver what they actually want to deliver. Most people who sell boilers actually want them to work perfectly. And so how do I build a contract that actually compensates them fairly, but actually drives them to that outcome and not to a target that I somewhat artificially impose or sort of model to get at.
So on that basis, how would you measure working perfectly?
As I said, and as we were talking about over lunch, I think there is a place for targets. There's a place for benchmarking. There's a place for looking at data across a sector to be able to guide that work. But again, in my experience with energy targets, the devil's always in the details, and they're always it's very, very, very difficult to get a model to really accurately predict an optimal outcome. And so it's, really using a target as a guide, but allowing for that flexibility to adapt that target to certain realities, and then also to be able to allow that target to inflate as other opportunities present themselves.
Okay. And if we run through some of these, so you've covered targets really well, the the measurement and reporting. You know,
Am I supposed to be reading the slide?
we've put that in place. It's good to.
There's a slide?
But and maybe Paul, you pick up the idea of comprehensive integrated solutions. When you came back the second time, there's a whole bunch more you could do. Thermogenics has a bigger contract to do things. The hospital gets bigger savings. Enbridge gets bigger incentives. Everybody's happy. What are your thoughts now from that experience about comprehensive integrated solutions? Yeah.
Just reflecting on this whole thing, and to be honest, in general, and you nailed it, John, in terms of like the ability to have true partnership. I'm also looking at my partner on the healthcare side as like, how am I going to be able to work with them? When we do things like this, like we do with Southlake, John's execution of the type of service contract we're running simply allows us to be in the room live often. And it's not like, hey, you must constantly be fixing stuff and making it better all the time. It's the understanding that, you know, we are always looking to strive for a little bit better. And John's expectations are, I always have to be running better and more reliably. And so for us, it allows us to be nimble and fast. Like if I were to enter into a performance-based contract, I can tell you, even if we had a great model and everything looked good and Kurt's numbers were dialed in, legal on my side and probably yours would take 6 months to a year because there's so much risk, even for me to take money on the winning side. Like if I actually do what I say and I get a bunch of the gain share, that's actually complex for some providers as well. Like that's hard to contractually enter. Whereas with John and I, like we identify the next layer of the onion, we collaborate on like everything else that's going on, what we think is the fastest solution. Greening, Enbridge weighs in, job goes ahead, and we just keep going and going and going. And I think, you know, I was having a conversation with Colin last night and she said, are you talking about boilers or are you talking about your kids? Like you're talking about boilers like your children. And it's like, I think that's what you want your service providers to be looking at your facility like. Like what's happening there? Do they have vested interest in the care and the health of the facility? And then I think the stringent outlook of a performance contract maybe isn't as required because you have somebody who you know has the same interests you do. But you're always driving for continuous improvement. So I think if I were to generalize back on any vendor, boiler, cooling, whatever, you want a company that's invested in their mantra of continuous improvement. That has to be in the foundation of the business. So, as that sound?
Yeah, no.
We're going to continue on?
No, yeah,
Were
you
you?
did a great job at answering a question you hadn't heard before. But I think, you know, the fact that we use a word pain as a part of a mechanism in a contract that we're trying to establish a trusted relationship with, I think is like just fundamentally flawed. And so, you know, I think that's where it's how do you replace that contractual mechanism and allow aligned interests to sort of, you know, exponentially drive an outcome, you know, without incentivizing on the negative sides.
But I just want to add one more thing, just from a flexibility standpoint on these things. Sometimes when you put together a very kind of sharp performance plan, it squashes innovation and it squashes kind of, hey, you know, I see what's specified here and I've got such a limited time to bid and, you know, I've got to be very specific with what I'm bidding. It's hard to then share about all the lessons learned you did in the last 3 jobs that were similar that, you know, in hindsight, I'd like to bid this, but I don't have time to, you know, have that conversation, get that on the table. I've just got to bid this sharp performance document and be very, very careful in doing so. So I think, you know, whatever you're shaping and to the point of Headwaters, what you're doing, which I think is great, is having more collaboration up front, trying to flush out all the what ifs, and then bringing it back home to a bit of a focused kind of rack and stack of priorities, right? So here's my thought.
And I think that Kurt brought up earlier, you know, we've seen some RFPs come out where it's very prescriptive. This is the target I need you to hit. I'm going to hold you to that target, and I'm not going to give you any information about the background. So then bid this, which of course makes the cost very large, and maybe the target is not achievable. But to Paul's point on the continuous improvement, you say, well, this is my target. I'm going to pick the right partner to work with, and maybe that's a couple of partners, a joint venture, to say, we're going to try and hit this target. And yes, there's going to be, you know, milestones along the way to make sure we're actually heading there and some off ramps. But I think that's the performance-based contract without
the big stick of pain with lack of information and costliness.
Yeah, I love that idea that, what a great word to build in at the front of a relationship. We'll share the pain. Just imagine getting married that way, right? I promise to share the pain for as long as we both shall live. Those are great insights. John, from the hospital's perspective, again, this is a six-figure acquisition. Would it have been easier if Thermogenics had brought financing for the project, or if this makes sense and you've got confidence, is the hospital going to be able to find the money? This was something like a 2.5-year payback, I think, in total.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, cost of capital is having a really material impact on everything right now, from the big down to the small. You know, I without sort of speaking, you know, because we were able to manage this. You said six figures like it was a lot of money. It's not that much. I spent six figures while we were talking already. Sorry.
To me, it's a lot of money. I don't know.
You know, I think the whole question around financing, you know, intersects with the whole question around, you know, going forward, is it actually logical for independent organizations to invest all this capital up front for all of these systems? And are we actually evolving to more of a service-based industry model where you have a utility actually stepping into that role in terms of central utility plants and now just providing a utility, and that sort of completely changes the whole paradigm around funding.
So reading through that, a funding offer back in the beginning with the whole comprehensive project, a financing offer, that would not have allowed the project to go quicker. It would not necessarily.
Oh, it definitely would, especially at 2%, which was where the interest rates were, I think, when we.
Okay, so the hospital would have been responsive to the fact Paul's coming in and saying it's cost this much.
Yeah.
And this is
Certainly we're looking at, and sorry, I kind of took it from a small picture question to a big picture answer, which is maybe not that useful, but obviously we're all looking at like the different means and methods that we have out there in terms of being able to aggregate capital costs through our utility bill, all sorts of different, because we do have to get to this end, and we know there isn't nearly enough money in the economy to be able to get us to that end. So we do need to look at other ways of
Okay, and Paul, without, again, no commitments, nobody's asking for a check, but can you imagine ways that Thermogenics could line up attractive capital? What could that look like? Again, we got the Canada Infrastructure Bank getting into the space. There's lots of things going on out there. Can you picture some kind of alliance that would allow Thermogenics to provide financing without it becoming too complicated?
Well, I think you nailed it. It would have to be an alliance, because if you want Thermogenics to be really good at boilers, we stay really good at boilers and not financial structures. So, you want to find a partner that's good at bridging the financing, but carrying the right technical along the way. So we haven't shied away from anybody saying, well, how would you feel about turnkeying this and paying for it all? And I said, no problem. How's 15% interest, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm not a bank. I have to hire financial advisors to help facilitate that. I'm just very, very good at the specific piece of equipment that you brought us in to deal with. So I think you want to be careful with that model, right? That's where Colin's team comes in, where all of a sudden you got somebody else to manage the business aspect of it all, bridge some of the financing, but keep the specialists doing what they do best. That's just my opinion of it all. I don't know how you guys feel about that. But.
Yeah, I think, but I think it does come to back to the picking the right provider, picking the right team, so that you can have those conversations. In the case of Southlake, they had the money, so no big deal. If that conversation went a little bit differently, or we don't have the money but the project makes sense, then there are solutions out there. There are aggregators, there's sources of funding, and sometimes the interest rate's a little bit high right now. But I think there are solutions, and it's that partnership piece, everybody being open with each other about where the spend is, where the money's going, and then how do we get the project going.
And just one other note, to your point, it's critically important that whatever your structure is, when you get that win and you get that money, you roll it right into the next tier, like the next layer of that onion. Like that really is, you want the whole, how are we going to do it today? Like that money has to be protected when you win. And like, as a vendor, I have no expectations to receive any of that. I just want to know that what we delivered, and that maybe there's more money now for the next job, right? And I think, I don't know the politics that you have to navigate to keep that, but I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle. You know, keeping that in the utilities.
One thing I'll add there is that you want to have a comprehensive plan to show how you're going to use, because there's more work, more investment that you can make than just one project. So you want to show that you have a long-term investment plan to continue to improve the entire facility. And also say, one is that it's financially viable. The other one is supports the goals, the sustainability, the environmental goals of the organization. So I'll go back again, Colin said, is that, you know, we're healthcare and it's about health. So I did hear a comment at the last conference is like, I don't want to just reduce the air changes in an OR to save money on electricity. But they missed the point, which is it was actually not only doing that, but it was reducing the demand, it was reducing energy. And as long as it doesn't harm the patient, which is the number one cause, it's the right thing to do for the environment, for the health of the community and the planet. Right? And those are the two things that sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yeah.
That we talk about energy and savings and X and Y and Z, and we don't realize it's all contributing to a much larger goal and objective.
Can I have one more?
Can
Can I have one more layer of that?
Go on then.
You just spawned some thoughts from there, but you know, we started this with the whole idea of the service plan,
Mhm.
and it's like your hair, like it's going to grow every year. You got to keep cutting it if you want a specific hairstyle. And so, like, if you want your boiler plant, cooling side, electrical to maintain within parameters, you need to constantly be servicing it, and you need to constantly be layering it against whatever measure you have. So if it's your last snapshot, that service piece, quarter over quarter, month over month, whatever, especially in Canada that has such distinct seasons, you can get a lot of hysteresis and performance there if you are not constantly recalibrating all this equipment. And I think that is what we're seeing in the data, aren't we?
That's right, and I wouldn't know anything about the hairstyle maintenance plan. I don't do that. Janet, let's move on. Same idea. What you're trying to do at Headwaters, which are the elements from this slide that kind of play out there, if you can read it from where you are? What are the key elements that Headwaters is looking for to make this make sense to your hospital in your current situation?
I mean, I'm listening to everything that everybody's saying here. I'm hoping James has taken a lot of notes because this will certainly
No pressure.
this is all what we're gonna head into. I mean, I think for us, we're a small hospital, as everybody else. We don't have a lot of money, but I think, you know, we want to be able to tie this, and what we're hearing from a lot of the folks within our organization is our foundation wants to provide money for equipment that's direct patient care. And we're trying to shift that ideal into what better way to support patient care than to provide a facility that you can, move, ebb and sway based on the patient acuity, where your patients are at the time. So there's a lot of education from that standpoint to the rest of the folks in the organization. So I think our next step in this is to start the conversation with the service providers from a clinical perspective, so they can hear the outcomes that we need to get to from their perspective. And then I think we really have to have that clear, flexible conversation and understand where they're coming from as well. It can't be one-sided. The risk has to be shared so that it can be successful. It works if our targets are there, they're unrealistic, and they're giving us justification for that, then that conversation has to be had and to come to an outcome that's going to be viable for both of us. So I think we're at that early stages in that game that we really are trying to get as much information as we can from each other and make sure that over the 25 or 30 years we're going to be together, that we have a performance agreement, shared agreement that's going to work for both parties. It's not going to be one-sided. And as things change, the hospital grows, we add an MRI or we add another OR, that opportunity is there for us both to have a win.
I like that. And again, very similar to what Cliff was saying. There's bigger outcomes here. You're in the healthcare business, so we get good clinical service outcomes, and it's responsible and accountable from a financial standpoint, as opposed to this is a financial investment that we're earning a good return on it. And that all comes back to the idea of relationship. I found this very insightful, by the way, so there I get my insights for the day. Can we kind of close, just go back to the whole idea of new hospital development, commissioning and operations? Colin, where's the biggest area for improvement? If we could make it even better than it is right now, is it project agreement, is it commissioning, design, modeling? Where's the biggest potential for improving that model so it's even better going forward?
You know, leave the project agreement aside for things like that. Commissioning. So I think commissioning is the big one we're doing. You know, I spoke about, you know, historically the service provider comes in 6 months before substantial, comes running in, and construction has done what they need to do, and then hands over the hospital and somebody's commissioned. I think there's a misunderstanding in commissioning that as of substantial completion, the building is running as good as it's going to run and should be running perfectly. We know that's not the case. And so some of our newer facilities, we're getting involved in commissioning very early on, specifically with our mechanical contractors. How do we help them with the analytics on how the building's running so that they don't have to come back? You know, there are technicians at all mechanical providers. Somebody makes a mistake, they have a bad day, they forget to tune one valve somewhere that you'll never find just through your BAS. So how do you put in some analytics to throw it in your face before you hit that substantial, before the patients move in? That's huge for us. And then how do you continue that commissioning in through, there's usually an operationalization period, and then into the first patient move. How do you keep that going so that the building is continually being tuned until it gets fully loaded and is being used and all the loads are in there and people are touching stuff, you know, that's new. That I think is the biggest gain.
And what has to change in the process for that to come true, or is the process already there? It's just a lesson learned and now you're doing it.
Yeah, I think, well, for us, it's a lesson learned. So we're involved. We have multiple partners at different facilities that are being constructed right now. And I think everybody's open. Again, we talk about energy very early on. So everybody is talking about energy along the way. And so what's the solution? Commissioning always comes up. It's always a sprint to the end for commissioning. And so it's partnerships. It's partnerships within in the case of P3s, within the project company. But I think even in a traditional build, it needs to be the partnership between the health authority and the construction contractor. Has to be.
And let me ask, so we got different contract forms, right? DBFM, there's DBF, which seems to be, as things swing up and down over time, and I guess there's still design build, right, going on there. Would that same advice apply to all those projects? Does, in some of those other contract forms, is commissioning even more important because you're not going to be there holding hands on the?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, the part of the challenge with the DBF is, you know, everybody's swamped on running the existing buildings that you're running. So we're fortunate we have resources that we're going to bring into a new building so we can staff up. We're seeing in BC is predominantly DBFs or DBs. But they've done a very good job of engaging a service provider, a third-party service provider, to come in and help with that. How do we work alongside the construction contractor? EllisDon Facility Services is doing this in a couple of facilities in BC, where we go along with the healthcare provider. We provide the additional resources to hold our construction colleagues accountable and running through the commissioning so that the building does get handed over in a format that they're looking for.
That's great. Cliff.
Well, I was thinking that if you move to a different model, procurement model, I think you have to recognize the DBFM model. I think is a very good model because it brought, and over the years it's evolved, but it's brought together the M part. Without the M part in it, so a DBF, there is a chance that you start to win the bids by reducing what you would put into something where you would do the M. And in doing so, if you don't have consultants on the client side, you'll lose that battle, and you'll lose it early with the Ministry of Health too. So I don't say that everything should be a DBFM, but the M has to raise itself up to be a larger part of the discussion. And I would say that goes back with the Ministry of Health, not asking for energy reports, not asking for how you're going to maintain this. What is the long-term commitment that you make in that? So,
And I think that's the key. You're right. The M is I mean, it also ring fences the funding for maintenance to ensure that the building is maintained at that same way for 30 years. The capital renewal plan is there out 30 years to make sure that the funding doesn't disappear through other means.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, in theory, just as a caveat to that, which is to say that I think as an owner, when you're pursuing a DBF, you resource yourself appropriately, recognizing you're going to be charged with commissioning, and that accountability all sits with you. When you're going through a DBFM, the contract actually puts that obligation on the project company, and as such, that we as an owner tend to invest, because we're already buying that service. We tend to underinvest in management of that piece, and I think that it's essential that we as owners support the activation of that kind of, as you were speaking to, as Niagara has done, just in terms of driving that outcome.
And so on our team, we had somebody responsible for facilities management, and they were our contact point. I always believe when you set up a project, you need to look at the procurement model. And number one is, and maybe this is like lesson number one, and I'll talk to you about this in a second, is that you have to know what the procurement model is well before you even start really getting to programming, because it takes that much effort to get yourself to align yourself with the procurement model. Number two, I always believe that you need to have your team mirror the team that you're going to engage. So if you're going to do an FM, you're going to facilities management, you need FM expertise on your team, internal. And I'll say one thing about the Ministry of Health is that the ancillary costs don't anticipate that. They don't expect you to have a larger team just because of X. And the more traditional, that's what it's based on. But we've learned lessons is that we need that for sure. No, can I go off topic now?
I could say no, but it wouldn't change anything.
Before you
so-
go off topic, I just wanted to finish that point is when you're like the specification, the PSOS for the building is something that's going to be implemented within a 3 to 4 year timeline. The FMOS or the FM output spec is specifying maintenance for 30 years.
Okay.
So the notion that you would, and we way over invest in this thing that's actually a much more discrete outcome, and completely under invest in something that's actually going out 30 years and hard to predict and really needs a lot more attention to get it right. Anyway, now you can go off topic.
Okay, thank you. I just on that point, we heard at another conference is that England is their PFIs are expiring and they're getting back buildings that are 30 years old in terms of energy, and they're good to go. That's part of the requirements, but they're good to go as a 30-year. Like it's like getting back a car that's 30 years old. It's not going to get the mileage you expected, and what are you going to have to invest in it from that point? The one thing I was going to say, and I'll try to keep this short, but I think this is fundamental, and for Ian, you can say you heard it here first. One of the things we're hearing from from both the Ministry of Health and Infrastructure Ontario and the construction industry is that we're in a non-competitive world for construction projects. So they're just too expensive. If we want to move to a competitive world of procuring large hospitals, we will be limited to approximately about $2 billion in value or 1.1 million square feet. The reason I bring this up here is the fact is that if you go across Ontario, most urban areas are planning hospitals in the 2 million square foot range, not the 1.1 million square foot range. And while Trillium, Sick Kids, and Ottawa are moving forward, we're saying that's sort of history. The reason I bring that up, particularly for this crowd, is because there's an adage that, we can maintain our facilities, but we're going to get a brand new hospital. And what I'm hearing is that, no, you're not getting a brand new hospital. You're getting half of a brand new hospital. And in a couple more years after that, you'll get the other half. But by that time, you'll have grown bigger. So you'll be looking at another half of that project. And our facilities aren't actually being turned over or demolished. They're actually turned into other healthcare facilities. So again, I think there's maybe it was next year's themes. I kind of, is the fact is that we have a promise of replacing aging infrastructure, and that's not happening. And so we really have to start thinking about how we continue to maintain our facilities. We do a really good job of that, but then for me, planning new facilities is like there's a hope that I don't have to do this much longer. No, that is a fallacy. We will have to maintain our facilities for a long, long time. Will they change the nature? Will they become ambulatory or transitional? Yes, but it's still healthcare. We still have to maintain. We still have to look at them. And then that brings up the second part. If we're all on this big, journey to look at decarbonization and doing it, and we're still stuck with 30-year-old cars, then what's that mean, and what does that look like? And I think that's a challenge for the entire industry to get together and start talking about decisions that are made beyond our capability, which is the procurement model and the size of the project and the impact it has on the industry.
Well, and just that last point on that carbon, when we think about trying to get to net zero by replacing facilities with where the embedded carbon in building that facilities is actually accounts for 50% of the overall carbon burden of the facility, we absolutely need to look at how does repurposing and reutilization of existing infrastructure and retuning it actually get us closer to that.
Great off-topic comments. Thank you. And maybe content for next year. I think this idea that we're not actually getting rid of the old facilities, and if we were, that's a problem because there's more waste than we even want to think about. And so they keep running. So as you say, we're not necessarily going in the right direction, however efficient we make the new site. So that's going to be a good topic for next year.